Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Hi, Mary. It's a pleasure to see you all here this evening. This is always a highlight of the year, and I have to say, so my name is Marc Parlange. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Applied Science, and it's always a pleasure to get together with the School of Nursing. Of course, as you all know, you are my favorite school. It's really the best, the brightest, the strongest, so it's always good to be here. It's really, actually, it's my honor this evening to introduce the director of this school, Suzanne Campbell, who will make the formal introduction. But I just want to say what a delight it's been, and I have really been so pleased over this past year to see the continuing interactions between all aspects of applied science and the rest of the university. And so I think the future is looking incredibly bright. So thank you, Suzanne.
Welcome, everyone, and we have a full house this evening. Thank you so much for being here. I'm seeing some familiar faces. We had almost 70 people this afternoon for our 2-hour symposium, so we already hosted with 4 panelists looking at the transformative practices in long-term care. And it was really interesting and informative dialogue, but I'm sure you'll hear a lot more in this next hour, and we'll have time to dialogue even further. Many of you know, but some may not, that this is a really special lecture. Mr. and Mrs. P.A. Woodward Foundation have generously supported this lecture for 48 years now. I believe it's our 48th. Since 1969, the Marion Woodward Lecture Award. And on October 24th, in 1969, the first Marion Woodward Lecture was held as part of the annual homecoming celebrations. Beth McCann was the director of UBC School of Nursing at the time, and she approached Mr. and Mrs. P.A. Woodward Foundation, which had been so generous in funding the Woodward Library at the time and the Instructional Resource Center at UBC, for sponsorship for an annual nursing lectureship. Although Marion Woodward had never allowed her name to be used in conjunction with such grants, she met with Beth McCann and agreed to have the lectureship named in her honor, as well as attended the initial Woodward lecture and hosted a tea in her home. Please note this evening that we have 2 members from the Mr. and Mrs. P.A. Woodward's Foundations attending this evening's event. Jackie Lisan is the executive director, and Jackie, can you wave? Thank you. And Jill Leversage is on the board of directors and also treasurer of the P.A. Woodward Foundation. And Jill's right next to Jackie there. Thank you for being here. So we know as the baby boomer age and generation continues to age, experts worry about the capacity for the health system to respond to older people's complex needs. The specialized care needs are particularly critical for people with dementia. For the 2016 Marion Woodward Lecture Award, Dr. John Keady, a nursing professor of older people's mental health at the University of Manchester and chief investigator of the Neighbourhoods and Dementia Study, is here to share his expertise in the area of dementia care and his perspectives on how the field is advancing in the United Kingdom. I'd like to invite Dr. Alison Finney up to give an introduction.
Let's lower this. You all look fantastic. Thank you for coming. I am so pleased to have this opportunity tonight to introduce to you Dr. John Keady, who for this year's Marion Woodward Lecture has so kindly agreed to fly many, many time zones to share from really his enormous wealth of experience as a researcher and as a practicing nurse working in the field of dementia care. Now, Dr. Keady trained first as a mental health nurse in Essex, graduating, we have noted earlier, really exactly 30 years ago. You admitted that earlier, so I don't mind saying it here tonight. So upon his graduation 30 years ago, he then moved to Wales, where for a number of years he held various clinical appointments in dementia care, which included 4 years as a mental health nurse working with a community-based team for people with dementia. But in 1993, I guess he must have gotten a bit of an itch because he went back to school and began doctoral study at the University of Wales in Bangor, and conducted his dissertation research really focusing on the social construction of dementia as experienced by people with dementia and their families. So really understanding about that lived experience. So with that PhD under his belt, a few years later, he headed north to Newcastle, where he held the first professorial chair in dementia care at Northumbria University. And I believe, John, that's when we first met. You were still at that position. But for the past 10 years, as we've just heard, he has been at the University of Manchester, where he is the professor of older people's mental health nursing, which is actually, interestingly enough, a joint clinical appointment with the Greater Manchester West Mental Health NHS Foundation Trust. So, along with a clinical appointment that sees him working 1 day a week in practice, Dr. Keady is internationally renowned for his leadership in dementia care, and I'm sure there are many of us here in the audience who are well familiar with the work that he has done over the past many years. He is a founding co-editor of Dementia, the International Journal of Social Research and Practice, which is really the primary journal in this field, and it was really the first journal in the field and has really, one might argue, has really created space for us to have this conversation that we're having here tonight. And as I expect we will hear more about shortly, he is also the Chief Investigator on the International Neighbourhoods and Dementia Study, as Suzanne just mentioned, which is part of the Prime Minister's Challenge on Dementia. And of course, as a professor at one of the very best nursing schools in the world, he teaches as well, in particular in the Master of Science in Dementia Care program that I believe we heard last night admits on the order of 20 students every year. So we hear all that and we realize that this is someone who is, as they say, doing it all. He is mentoring new practitioners, he is building important new knowledge, and he's providing care. And more importantly, he's doing this internationally, he's doing it nationally, but he's also doing it very locally in his own home community. And of course, that is not easy. We were talking earlier today about really how very difficult it is to do all of those things and to feel like you're doing them well enough. But what it means is that he really has a very good sense of not only what's happening in this field that is growing and changing really very rapidly at this moment in time, but, and when I stop to think about it, I think this is why I have admired his work for so long. More than most people, I think, he has a very strong sense of what could and indeed what should be. And it's that kind of what I think of as an informed vision that we can all learn from. So with that, I invite you to join me in welcoming Dr. John Keady.
Well, I'm very humbled and I'm very honoured. And I'm very honoured to be standing here before you today and to do this really prestigious lecture. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you to everybody who's made it happen. And can I say a special thank you to Mary Lee Hughes for all the organisation behind the scenes, and also to Alison Finey. Thank you so much for all that. I am honoured to be here tonight to do this lecture. And what I've tried to do with it is actually give a little bit about me. It's sometimes when you actually reflect on yourself, some of the best insights actually emerge. So I've tried to approach this lecture tonight through a lens of reflective understanding about maybe what's brought me to be able to even think about remotely being in front of you tonight, to talk about some of the work we've been involved with. What Alison didn't say was that the PhD was my only degree. I don't have any other one. I don't mind admitting that. It's how it was. My training was asylum-based, and I kind of had to go to evening class for about 7 years and more to actually get the qualifications to enable me to have a PhD. I also work, as Alison said, in Manchester, but I work in Salford, which is the 5th most deprived area of the UK. So we have a lot of vascular conditions, a lot of vascular dementia, and a lot of alcohol-related dementia as well. So it's a very, very underprivileged community, but it's a great privilege to work in that community as well. There's little visions of home, just one of Manchester. This is a bit condensed, it's a bit more spread out than that, but this is a bit photoshopped, but really some of the landmarks of the area in which I've got to know in the last decade. For those of you who may not have been to the UK, Manchester, I don't think I've got a clicker, but Manchester is right in the middle of England. It's seen to be in the north, but my hometown is actually Newcastle upon Tyne, which is a little bit further north. So I could speak Geordie to you, but I don't think I will. But after a few drinks, I can speak it really well. So, but that's my hometown, and I have been very privileged to work through Manchester, and the city of Manchester stands in the middle, as you can see in the map behind me, and Trafford is, if you really made it as a footballer, is where Manchester United's ground is, and at the very bottom of Trafford is the very expensive parts of Manchester, you know, where Wayne Rooney and all the football stars by and large will live when they play for Manchester United. In the north of that map, around Bury and Bolton, in Bolton it's one of the most diverse populations in the entire country, a very multi-ethnic mix. And in this part of the world, we have basically a bit of everything. We have the rich, we've got the famous, and we've got really very deprived communities. We've also got a council that is exceptionally empowering about aging. Manchester is the only World Health Organization age-friendly city in the UK. And as I say, the one at the bottom of the town hall, we do a lot of work through the town hall. So if we have consultation meetings with people with dementia, their families, a lot of it happens through the town hall. So I thought I'd actually show you a little glimpse of home there. And this is where I work. The University of Manchester is a long-established university, but the more modern building is the Jean McFarlane building, also named after a nurse, Jean McFarlane. And I work on the 6th floor, so the mental health department and the dementia area in which I work is actually positioned on the 6th floor. So if anybody's in Manchester at any time, you know where we are, and the door is always open, and I genuinely mean that. Please come and see us. We've had some famous artists, of course, through Manchester with Lowry and the depictions of Salford. It's where Engels wrote with Karl Marx those issues of the Communist Manifesto because of the deprived neighbourhoods in Salford. So a lot of that sort of background and cultural history comes to the area in which I still work. This is a little picture of my own home. I wish I lived there, but this is the Great Orme with views down to Conway, across the estuary and across to North Wales. And it's a very beautiful part of the world to live, and I'm very privileged to be there. So for tonight, I just want some personal reflections and milestones on some of my own career and what led me here to be here today. A focus on my own dementia team, about how we work and what we work in. A focus on the Neighbourhoods Study, and then some final thoughts. And I'm going to go back to the Middle Ages to start this talk, really. And in the Middle Ages in Cambridge, Emma de Beston in 1383 was asked these questions. In what town she was in, how many husbands she had had, how many days there were in a week, how many shillings there were in 40 pence, and if she would rather have 20 silver groats than 40 pence. So from 600 and odd years, that's a really interesting scale. And it's an interesting scale because it's very biographically driven. So obviously, men used to die off a lot. So the way of assessing what her memory like was very much narrative driven from Emma's own memory. It was a really quite an interesting scale. Sometimes we don't do that today, but it's nothing new. I thought I'd share a picture of the asylum in which I trained, which is now luxury housing. But in 1983, which was in Brentwood in Essex. But in those days, Worley Hospital was a great big asylum. And it was the first time I'd ever met a person with dementia, and I'm there with my arms around Stanley. I still remember his name very well. And I worked on a male ward. It wasn't Azalea, but it was a ward similarly named. It was called Daffodil Ward. And that was my first exposure to anybody who lives with dementia. I'd worked in insurance for 4 years. I was 22 years of age, and I had some hair. Not that I'm bitter over the passage of time, but there we go. Those things happen. But that sort of ward environment was very familiar to me, about tilted chairs and you know, the TV very high up and very highly polished floors. That was my background and my values and my interest in dementia. When I think about it, one of the first books I was offered to read about dementia was by Ada Alzheimer, because I went there to be a psychiatric nurse. And at those times, it was the main nursing intervention was to preserve the patient's appearance, and the main nursing intervention other was to maintain their social appearance. So that was kind of their behavior. That was largely it. There was no drugs, there was no therapy. Reality orientation was just around the corner with Bob Woods, so it was kind of a very much, you shouldn't enjoy this type of experience. Bryce Pitt was writing at that time about psychogeriatrics, an introduction to the psychiatry of old age. This is going back to 1982. And it was described, dementia was described in a very narrative terms as a tragic disorder, as if the true self dies long before the body's death, and in the intervening years, a smudged character disintegrates noisily and without dignity into chaos. So this lack of self was very much evident, 30 odd years ago. We also, as mental health nurses, weren't supposed to enjoy our experience of working with people with dementia. But I remember stepping onto those wards back in the beginning, so April of May of 1983, working there with people with dementia for the very first time. It was a ward of 40 men, and it was my job to be dressed in a white coat and to give out the drugs and to basically put the clothes out for the next morning, to make sure the tea was served in great big pots with plastic cups with 2 handles so that somebody could drink it, highly polished floors, highly polished chairs, and chairs tilted back. That was the world in which I entered the field of dementia. I loved it. I genuinely did. I found in that moment in time in my life a connection to people which I think I'd been searching for whatever reason. And it was a connection to how somebody with dementia was trying to see the world around them. I wasn't trained, even now, like I am today. I was trained mainly in the physical conditions of dementia. But that human connection, that care and commitment, and I remember very clearly somebody with dementia, when a child was brought onto the unit, he just opened his arms out in a great big loving embrace. And it was a moment that was quite revelatory to me, and it made me think, I really don't want to do anything with my life. It was truly about trying to give something to this field. Also at the time, I think it's important that we talk about technology and computers, and we almost think our own brains are made of computers, but of course they're not. They're made of lots of neurons. And this is a picture of a memory being made. It's a very special picture, because that's what happens to us. That's what is happening inside our brains. This is how memories and our sense of self are identified. And here's a photograph, or 2 photographs, of Augusta Dieter and Ada Alzheimer, who was a psychiatrist. Augusta Dieter was 51 years of age, and it was 1901. And she was admitted to the Frankfurt am Main Insane Asylum in November of 1901. And she went in with the following doctor's note, that Augusta Dieter had a weakening of the memory, that she had a persecution mania, she was sleepless, she was restless, she couldn't perform any physical or mental work, and she needed treatment in the asylum. And that was taken directly from the doctor's admission notes in 1901. I work on admission wards a little bit now, and you don't get an awful lot more detail in 2016. So a really interesting insight as to how it was being performed. But what was fascinating about this is that these notes were recoverable and translated. And this is Alzheimer's very early assessment on Augusta Dieter. And he did an assessment of her writing, and he's basically said, when she has to write Mrs. Augusta Dieter, her name, she writes Mrs., and we must repeat the other words because she forgets them. The patient is not able to progress in writing and repeats, I have lost myself. In reading, she seems not to understand what she reads. She stresses the words in an unusual way. Suddenly she says, twins, I know a Mr. Twin. She repeats the word twin during the whole interview. And she died in the asylum on April the 8th in 1906, and she was 56 years of age. And when she died, obviously her brain was taken out, and the plaques and tangles were identified, staining methods, and Alzheimer's disease was born and christened, and what we had was a medical adventure, really, for the last century, about naming and organizing dementia as predominantly a biomedical condition. But it wasn't the whole story. It genuinely wasn't the whole story. 100 years after her death, one of the lovely things about doing the Dementia Journal is that we had an article in it by Sean Page. And basically, Sean had a look at her life and saw that Augusta Dieter was born in Kassel in Germany. She had, as she was at the time, a female role of children, church and kitchen. She got married at the age of 23 to Karl, who was a railway clerk, and they moved to Frankfurt, where she stayed all her life. They were married for 33 years, happy and harmonious, rather nice. They had a daughter together called Thelke. She was described in the notes, and as you can see in the photograph, as a tall woman with long brown hair, brown eyes, and elegantly long fingers. And her husband struggled to pay the fees for his wife's care, and he was seen to visit her frequently. So what we have here is not a story of the brain, but a story of human beings, a story of a family, and a story of great love. And I think that was the story that somehow God was missing from dementia for many, many years. And we started to put it back, but it's an exceptionally important case study, because this case study is really a case study of potentially all our lives. It's certainly a story of my father's life. My father lives with, he had a subarachnoid hemorrhage when he was 3 years younger than me, and he struggled with his memory now, and he's now 80. He's survived. He's a real survivor with his dementia. He's 80. My mother's the same age. And when I did a presentation with my dad about 10 years ago. It's the only time in my entire life I sat down to interview him, like he maybe would do, and it's just a very interesting way of actually working. And he said, John, this is my life. I live in a big hole. I wear the wrong shoes. I have lists and memory aids to get me by every day. The strength of our relationship, and he's talking about my mother here, was everything to me. I rely on familiarity and routine, and what I've got now is a changed life. I wrote that up. I gave my dad the first author credit and published it in Nursing Older People. It's the only article I've ever written where I didn't change a word. I sort of wrote it, stopped, submitted it. That was the end of that. Because it's a story of a son with his father, and at times I may have worked in dementia for 33 years, but sometimes I know absolutely nothing about it. Absolutely nothing. It's just a total mystery. It's a fight. My mother's been in hospital 3 or 4 times because of the stress of caring for my dad. He doesn't want to leave home. So sometimes you feel at one level, both you can understand and appreciate the research literature and all the body of practice, but somebody like my father's resilience and stoicism will keep him at home. I know that. I worked as a community nurse, and that in dementia. That didn't really help. That was in North Wales. It's no comparison to the Rocky Mountains, but this is a view of Snowden. I used to. That was part of my area where I actually worked with people with dementia. It was a very beautiful part of the world. And it was around that very early time in the early 1990s, I met Mike Nolan. He was doing his PhD at the time, and I started an evening class. I did a postgraduate certificate in gerontology because I was 30 and I had a professional qualification. And we wrote a book together with Gordon Grant. 1993 was my very first ever conference presentation. And through the interviews I was doing with family carers, we developed a temporal model which became basically the substance of that Understanding Family Care book. That Understanding Family Care book is still cited, but it's now been discontinued. And if you go onto Amazon, I think you can buy it for about 1 pence, which is always rather disheartening. But there was elements of that was very much constructed from an understanding of what it is to transition through dementia at this time from a carer's perspective. Mike and I then went on to develop, Mike went on to develop the census framework, and we developed relationship-centred care together around about the year 2000. And what I've been trying to do recently, and the census framework is made up of areas of security, belonging, continuity, purpose, achievement, and significance. And we've applied the census then to people living with the condition, family, staff, and more recently in a publication we did together on the community. So how does the community for people with dementia create a sense of belonging or purpose or significance? How do they do that? So these become potentially measurable outcomes using the census framework. As Alison kindly intimated, we developed the Dementia Journal back in 1999 with the first edition in 2002. It was always been a strong part of our value base that people with dementia have the same opportunities to write for us and their family carers and families, and have that contribution right in the middle of academic articles. So we don't separate them. So you can get a great big social research survey and then somebody's individual experience. It's always been hugely important. And we kicked off the journal with Gloria Sterren, who did an editorial for us. Gloria Sterren was Penny Harris's PhD supervisor, and Gloria Sterren had Alzheimer's disease when she wrote the article for us. And what she said from the very beginning was the meaning of time shifts in dementia. It really shifts. It's all over the place. And she said to us that you work in your time and I live in my time. And what we must try and do is understand that meaning so much better. This is a diagram. I don't expect you to read through it all, but it's a diagram that was published with a lady called Mo Quinn and her husband Pat Quinn. And at the time we were doing a book on partnership working in dementia, in research methods. It was a book that didn't sell very well, but Mo was a person, the youngest of 4 sisters. She'd seen her other 4 elder sisters die of young onset dementia, and she knew that was her trajectory. And she drew her dementia as a map, as a car going over somewhere. And she was talking here about what this is, what my dementia is. We wrote a narrative and a case study and published it. And after she died, part of this was written and shared in her funeral. Now for us, that is an enormously important part of validating the authenticity of her experience. She wanted to be known by her name. She didn't want that hidden, so we didn't hide it. We've always tried to use in our own research work different ways of thinking about dementia, giving the power away from the researcher to participants or co-researchers. Here's some work really from Penny Hibbert's PhD study, where she gave family carers a camera and said, go and show me your quality of life. So a picture of a mother's painting, a picture of intergenerational care, and a picture of a fish finger. And the fish finger kept her husband alive. It's as simple as that. It was a direct way of understanding that real need that we all have as human beings to feed or to care for another person through the preparation of food. And that was incredibly important to her. This is Dennis. We developed a method called center stage diagramming. And I've written about it and published it. And this is Dennis doing some center stage diagramming. He's doing it with a really academic fuzzy felt and his own colors in his front room, and it was really lovely because the center of the stage, or the center of the page, is the most important domain of his life. And what he put right in the middle, these are all his colors, he chose everything, was his symptoms, what he lived with. My symptoms are the most crucial thing in my life. He then put different colors, and he put different things on the stage, so the closer to the middle, the closer to him. And above him, as you can see, he put Lily, and then a little bit further to the side, he put Val. Val was his wife, and Lily was his dog. which is interesting. Because if you're there, if you think about it, if you truly, for those of us who have owned dogs in our lives, and I still miss our little Cavalier King Charles Spaniel terribly, but they give you that unconditional love. That's what they do. They come there and they sit there and they're with you and they don't move and they're just there. And that is what he was telling us. My dog is there for me, but my wife at the moment isn't. So part of the work is, whilst it's a research interview, it's also a therapeutic discourse, because what we need to do is bring Val close to Lily, close to him. It's almost as simple as that. We did a study, just in terms of context. This is Pam Schweitzer's work with Errol and Bruce. It was a book called Remembering Yesterday and Caring Today. And it was basically reminiscence, how to do reminiscence, or reminiscence outline. And that is supposedly a natural trajectory through somebody's life. You might argue about it. Not everybody gets married. Not everybody's heterosexual. Not everybody have babies and children. But by and large, that was the program that was outlined. And we had, between 2008 and 2012, the largest ever psychosocially funded piece of research ever. It was £1.6 million given to us by the National Institute of Health Research to examine the purpose of reminiscence and to prove that it worked. We'd had different platforms and different trials. I was involved at this point in time, not in the earlier work. And basically, there was 486 couples involved, 228 couples initially. We did everything. It was brilliant. The quality of life measure was a quality of life AD. That was the primary outcome measure. And do you know what? It didn't work. When it was unblinded, when the trial was unblinded, the only thing that actually the effect was that doing reminiscence caused carers more stress. That was the finding. But for any of us, including me, who went to join in the groups that were in Salford, that happened in Bradford, they happened in London, they happened in Hull, they happened in Wales, but going there to the events, just like this morning, what you had was fun and laughter and people enjoying themselves. And what we didn't have was a scale to measure it. And I think that to me was revelatory too. It was really about thinking, what are we trying to achieve by this? What do we want to do in dementia? That was this paper was actually published. It's online. It's open access. That was the main outcome paper. Please feel free to read it and learn from it. We've done lots of different types of work, like walking interviews. We've done social network mapping, and our team basically is trying to respond to the numbers of people with dementia in the UK, but try not to be confused by the numbers. But there's individuals. One individual is one individual. It's not 850,000 or 1.4 million. It's one individual. And I think that's been the work that we've tried to do in our dementia team over the years. We're a dementia team that looks at the everyday life and everyday experience. We have been influenced tremendously by the work in Vancouver, by Deb and Alison and others. It's always been enormously influential to us. And myself and Simon Burrow, who leads the MSc in Dementia Care, I'm not sure if the UBC have a dementia strategy as a university, but in Manchester, we've been working across all our faculties over the last 3 years to create a university-wide dementia strategy. It comes under the umbrella of Dementia at Manchester, and myself and Simon Burrow lead the Living Well theme. So we try to put on events, we celebrate achievements that are to do with living well with dementia, as done by all staff and also by ex-employees who also live with dementia and are brought back into that fold. This is the MSc. Our work is clustered around areas of biography and narrative, neighbourhoods, lifestyle, creative arts, and education and practice. And we have family networks, transitions, and involvement as intersecting across all those clusters. We like visual recordings, photos, videos. We do face-to-face interviews, outdoor spaces, biographies, sensory interviews, appearance biographies. We do focus group work, social network mapping, and a lot of drawing and creative arts and writing. We do the occasional randomized control trial, but I can't say I'm always being the best at it, but we do get involved in that. But by and large, we are a strong social research team. This is some of our PhD students that we're working with, and I can see Sally Thorne in the audience. And Sally Thorne met with Leslie Jones, who's working on interpretive description, which was in Sally's work. So we're trying, the links, oddly, between UBC and our team have been strong over the years. We've had different types of PhDs. Some of them have just finished. Most important ones are probably around semantic dementia. And we also had the very first PhD by a lady who was deaf that had sign language and dementia. So this is basically a dementia experience through a change of signage, rather than through a change of language. This is some of Shah's work. Shah does some lovely work with people with dementia, and they basically are plotting out their neighbourhoods, their structure. Shah works in public health, and this person with dementia beautifully laid out their neighbourhood for us as a very bottom-up map, and then she put a huge line through number 114, because she doesn't get on with them. So that was, well, human life. We've done work in semantic dementia with Jackie Kindell. Jackie just finished a PhD with us. She was a wonderful student, a very experienced speech and language therapist. We've published a number of papers, but what we can't get published at the moment is the case study work, where we have somebody with semantic dementia intergenerationally with the family, creating a music DVD which the person with semantic dementia just comes alive to and sings and has embodied interactions with her daughter. There she's cheek to cheek. And it was the Lady in Red by Krista Berg, that sort of song. Beautiful voice. And in semantic dementia, it is normally seen as a very negative, don't understand emotions, poverty, very medical discourse around negativity. But Sarah knew the meaning of the word love, and she knew her daughter. And it was the most beautiful DVD. We also try to create life storybooks so that people with dementia can plot either individually or with their families. This is like a song. This was actually done by Pam Roach, who's she was a postdoctoral fellow in Alberta, and I was able to supervise her postdoctoral work. She had a Alzheimer's Society-funded project on young onset dementia in Canada. She did this work with us, or with myself, over in Manchester first. And what we've got here is basically somebody with dementia saying to his wife, "I love you," in a song, and composing songs about it. So a different way of actually interacting with, well, it's not really data, it's somebody's life. This is our Deaf with Dementia project. We do work where I'm the consultant on hair and care, and or not, as the case may be. But we've actually worked a lot around appearance identities and appearance biographies. Because especially for men and women, that area of very personal care is exceptionally important. And identity for women is explained and explored through their hairstyles, phenomenally important. We work with Manchester Camerata, which is part of the orchestra in Manchester. We did some evaluations with them. We had the link there, I won't push it, but is to a Portraits of a Place, which is a work we did with the Camerata, and with the Daisy Bank Road Clinic, which is basically an NHS Young Onset Dementia Service, and their family members, to try and co-create meaning of their experience through live music. And we have an ESRC-funded PhD student, which I'm supervising, I'm lead supervisor on, looking at in-the-moment multisensory assessment and developing a tool which is really based on embodied life experience. We've done work in general hospitals. This is work took us just over 3 years. All these materials are free to download from the internet, and people with dementia took part, were instrumental. They're actually there on the videos, saying what they want from actually when they go into hospital, or explaining their experiences when they were there. And if I can distill any messages down from dementia that we did in 3 years into a few key ones, it was about feelings, it was about meaning, it was about supporting relatives, it was creating a sense of security and familiarity in the hospital, and providing opportunities for activity and seeing the person and not the dementia. And this brings me on to basically our study that we're doing at the moment, one of the studies. This was funded in 2014, and it goes through to 2019. So I don't have all the data for you at the moment. But what it comes from is basically a background of a plethora of policy initiatives. There's been so much work. It's been wonderful. When I first came into dementia, there was the Rising Tide, I think in 1983, which I think was the name of you had a Canadian strategy called the Rising Tide, didn't you? And we had one in the UK in 1983 called exactly the same thing. So in the last 30 years, and certainly the last 10 years, there has been so many initiatives in dementia. It's just been a real pleasure to see this, to be part of it in some occasions, and to see people with dementia starting to take control of their lives through the Dementia Alliance International, and starting to put forward their ideas of what they want us to do, normally framed through human rights. Some of the work we've been involved with then has been around the development of a dementia-friendly community, of what this is. In a traditional sense, this is the Alzheimer's Society definition. It's one where people with dementia are empowered to have high aspirations, feel confident knowing they can contribute and participate in activities that are meaningful to them. That's kind of a formal definition. When we got this grant, or when I got this grant, it was, I didn't frame it around dementia-friendly communities. I framed it around neighbourhoods. So there is a difference, which I'd like to share with you. These are some of the leads on different work programs that I'm showing that on the picture behind me. And these are some of the organisations that are involved. If you're interested, we have a Twitter account at NBDem, and we have a website. So please feel free to visit it and explore it in a little bit more detail. It came directly from the Prime Minister's Challenge, the first one in 2012. Which went through to 2015, and then there was a new challenge to 2020, and then David Cameron had a Brexit interview and failed. so I don't know quite what's going to happen, but the changes in the UK are very, very real. But David Cameron did put his heart and soul into dementia. He really, as a politician, he really took this to heart. And he gave his name to the strategies, and he put his name to many initiatives in dementia, which I can honestly say we're very, very grateful for. In the first Prime Minister's Challenge of 2012, it focused on 3 areas: driving improvements in health and social care, creating dementia-friendly communities, and better research. And under the better research, it was research that involved people with dementia. We didn't quite spell out how to do that, but that's what it also involved. And again, this is led directly by Deb O'Connor, Alison Finey, and others here at UBC, and again with Ruth Bartlett, because for the very first time, the word citizenship and dementia was placed in a policy document in the UK by the Prime Minister in 2012. And that's a direct link to the centre and to the work here at the UBC. And that sort of citizenship agenda was embraced and has been embraced by our own country and by our own initiatives. Research starts in different ways, and the Neighbourhood Study started through a review that we did unfunded. We just got together as a team and said, we need to do something about this. Because we couldn't see very much in the literature about how people with dementia interacted with outdoor spaces and how they constructed their sense of identity to a neighbourhood. So we took us about 10 months. We did a literature review. We basically published it in reviews in clinical gerontology. And in 2012, we found 18 studies which matched our inclusion criteria. So this is about people with dementia going about their everyday lives. That's all there was. There wasn't an enormous amount. We were able to group that under 3 themes, which was outdoor spaces, the built environment, and everyday technologies. And our conclusions in that review in 2012 was that there was no research that set out to inquire how people with dementia defined the neighbourhood or the place in which they lived. We were developing some innovative ideas around research methods, such as walking interviews, but these were just innovations that weren't really standardized. And there was no research, really, that understood how people with dementia were active in defining themselves as placemakers. There's just nothing. So that led on basically to the development of a research proposal. and this diagram that I'm sharing with you was actually how I sold the study to the grant awarding panels, because we needed something very quick and visual. And we put neighbourhoods in the middle, and we put spaces, places and people around it, very malleable, value flexible, and we used Tim Blackman's work on neighbourhoods as a frame. And basically, in Tim Blackman's work, neighbourhoods are places where people more or less feel in control of the surroundings in which they live. So this is about us, really, as we return home tonight, understanding that maybe how do we define the place in which we live. Our study has 8 research programs. It has people with dementia really central to the entirety of the program. We worked with the Educate group, which is a group of people with dementia in Stockport. Open Doors Network, which is again a group of people with dementia in Salford. We worked with the Scottish Dementia Working Group, who you might know, who are based in Glasgow. And we worked with Age UK Salford to develop a new group of people with dementia who wanted to come together to inform and be part of the study. As part of that, when we consulted with people with dementia, they wanted to have their own member-led projects, so we enabled that to happen. We've got partners in the UK, in Manchester, Stirling, London, Liverpool and Salford, and we work closely with the Centre for Dementia Research in Linköping University. I know that Alison's just come back for some time in Linköping, and Professor Lars Christer Heiden leads that centre, and it's been very close to us since we set this project up. We've got 5 funded PhD studentships that run through the programme as well. This behind me, this makes me feel a bit like a business person, because this is all the members of staff who work on the programme. So basically, the ones in red are people with dementia who were part of the co-investigating team as we put the grant in. And the ones in the purple colour are the leads of the different work programmes. And the rest are people who are employed or are co-investigators on different work programmes. So it's big. It's like running your own business a little bit sometimes. Our primary aims in the Neighbourhood Study is really centred around that experience of people with dementia and understanding their neighbourhood and how they interact basically with the neighbourhood structure. How people with dementia and how we can learn from people with dementia as they make decisions about their everyday life. And we want to build a capacity within the research community and the networks of people living with dementia and their care partners. There's many others too, but those were really our fundamental aims of the entire project. We have a scientific advisory committee, and Professor Tom Scharf, he was at the National University of Galway, but is now at Newcastle University. He's chairing it. Agnes Houston, you may recognise the photo, but she's a person with dementia who's very active in the field, and she's Vice Chair of the European Working Group of People with Dementia. We have Jean-Georges, who's the Executive Director of Alzheimer Europe. Mira, who's in the Netherlands and who really is the Director of Interdem. And Christine Milligan, who is a social and human geographer and based at Lancaster University. And together, as a team, this is how we break it up. Our first work programme is on member involvement, where we lead it in Manchester. We are basically using longitudinal data sets to create profiles, cognitive profiles across England, looking at how neighbourhoods are structured through using representational data. We're developing a dementia core outcome set for community. Work Programme 4 is really, it's a £1 million research programme that is looking at the constructions and meaning of neighbourhoods in 3 parts of the UK and over in Sweden. We're doing some work in hospitals, seeing hospitals as a part of the community. And one of the PhD students is looking at the meaning of home for people with dementia as they're transferred into hospital. We've got work on couples doing things together, where Ingrid Hellstrom from Sweden is leading it. For the very first time, we're doing some work on deaf sign language users with dementia to develop the very first ever intervention, looking at if you're deaf and sign and you actually want to reminisce about your life or plot things down. For the very first time, that work is happening and it builds on the Alzheimer's Society funded project we had, myself, Ailis Young and Emma Ferguson-Coleman and others had with the Alzheimer's Society for the previous 4 years. And we've also got a staff and wellbeing service. So basically we have a clinical psychologist who's there to support anybody with dementia as part of the program and any member of staff. I hadn't seen that role being done before, but it's been instrumental and such an important part of the program. When we first started, we got together and put down some team values, which are those behind us, and we published them and tried to live by them the best we can. And Caroline Swarbrick leads the work program 1, which is on member involvement, or people with dementia coming together to look at their role in research. And if I do nothing else in my entire life, this one for me, this piece of work, which took about 3 years, is more than enough. And it was basically consulting with a number of people with dementia, working very closely with them to see how they would like to be involved in the research that we're doing. So we created a model, or they created a model, we helped to refine it, they validated it, and it's just been published. And basically what we've got is people with dementia wanting to be involved in different ways, in different methods, with different approaches, from consultation to piloting to data collection to translating and understanding the findings, to evaluation, and to be involved in future work, which is of course involved in helping to shape new research proposals. And that's a model informed and owned by people with dementia, I'm very pleased to say. And people with dementia are also part of the authorship. We haven't just claimed it all ourselves. Some of the projects that people with dementia are involved with on the Neighbourhoods Study, there's a number of them. But we, in the Scottish Dementia Working Group, actually are putting together how-to guides, how to do research for researchers. So they're making a series of how-to short 3 to 5 minute guides, which will be available on YouTube and as guides for us. The group in Salford are coming together in a very collaborative way to actually just document the changing face of Salford over the years as they've known it and grown up in it. It's a very locally based group. And we're working with Salford Museum, Art Gallery, and also the BBC through Bina. She's been a fabulous resource to us. The Educate group are developing audits, usable audits, that basically can be used to help dementia-friendly environments. And Salford Inspire are doing a number of information-giving work through a number of ways of thinking, of interacting with the community. This is a photograph of Joy Watson, and Joy is employed as a person with dementia to lead that work. It's a real pleasure to have her as a member, a paid member of the team. And all people with dementia who take part in our research are paid for their time. They're paid as researchers, but we couldn't get them researcher status for reasons which are complex. But we do pay anybody who takes part with our service, you know, the research assistant salary and wage. This is Joy. This is her, basically a very, very prominent woman. Don't forget the me in dementia. How true is that? We also work very closely with Anne Johnson. This is Anne here. We had the pleasure of writing with Anne quite recently with Steve Sabat, simply because in the academic press, people were calling people with dementia demented. And Anne hated it. She just hated it. Anne was actually a nurse lecturer in ophthalmic nursing. She worked at the University of Manchester. And when I started in September of 2006, Anne was retired in about the April, at the age of 51, with Alzheimer's disease. But we're able to bring her back to actually teach on the MSc course, to bring that biographical connection and continuity back into her life. So she continues now to teach on the MSc course. And that biographical continuity is incredibly important. It gave her a measure of self-esteem. And here she's being awarded an honorary doctorate for her work in public health promotion in dementia. So in all fairness to her, wonderful woman. So I've shared some of the database work. If I can share with you just a little bit of the outcomes, what these maps are looking like. I'm not going to explain them in great detail, but next year they will be fully functioning. They'll be on our Neighbourhoods website, and they're giving off neighbourhood constructions of where people with dementia are clustered or some of the risk factors. It's a really fascinating piece of work. It's very computer generated and literate, but whenever the demonstrations are given to me, it's just a fabulous piece of work. But it's here potentially to be used for service planning as well as anything else. This is Richard working in the areas of Linköping, Manchester and Stirling. They've done a number of interviews so far. They've done 20 walking interviews, and what's fascinating is that people with dementia on this part of the work, even though it was meant to be a community-orientated session, what we're having is a lot of home tours. People with dementia's worlds are kind of lived a lot in their home and around their home. Getting out is a struggle at times. So we're having a lot of home tours. It wasn't what we anticipated, but it's how people with dementia are telling us that they actually live their life this way because they're quite frightened of getting outside the front door and going anywhere, because it's a scary world out there. So a lot of home-based meaning is being placed on this data. We weren't expecting it, but it's something that will materialize in the next couple of years. Our work programme 7, as I said, is the Deaf with Dementia one, and it's just a fascinating piece of work. It will run through now to 2019, and they'll be doing interventions and currently developing an app with an app company to actually work through the laptops. So we have the Wellbeing service is run by Dr. Ruth Elvish, who's a clinical psychologist. And what we've tried to do with this, as I said, is really develop the support to people with dementia. A lot of people with dementia take advantage of it, and so do staff too. So there is an evaluation that's going on with that service at this very moment in time. This is our 5 PhD students. So we've got PhDs looking at, Katie's doing a cooperative inquiry, where people with dementia are looking at the meaning of research in their lives and researching that research question. There isn't an awful lot about cooperative inquiry in the literature in dementia, but it's great to actually start to support this work. Alzana's doing, looking at different forms of couplehood work, and so it goes on. It's been a year of loss in my life, I will say that. Professor Jan Reid died this year. Jan was a wonderful friend and colleague who I had the pleasure of knowing at Northumbria and publishing with. And she died at the age of 57 of multiple sclerosis. But she wrote a book called Practitioner Research, which is fantastic. She was a nurse researcher, one of the first gerontological nurse researchers in the UK, was a feisty woman, but what an intellect. And she died this year. If you haven't read her work, could I urge you to at least dig out that practitioner research book is fantastic. Because in that, what she's saying to us as nurses and other care providers is that the sample base is in front of your nose. You just have to turn the meanings around. I'd also like to dedicate that presentation this evening to Sylvia. Sylvia and I edited the first book in the world on younger people with dementia in 1999. And she died when she was 66. Sylvia. I remember when we put the book together, we were turned down by a number of publishers because they said nobody's going to be interested in younger people with dementia. So anyway, 1999 came, it was published, and it's still available. There's still not enough done, but it's still available. And that 99 book, I wrote with Sylvia the conclusion to it. It's almost the last words in the book. And I said these words: "It is to ourselves that we must turn to create the most meaningful change. We must encourage others and ourselves not to be fearful, to encourage inclusion and participation, to create community-based resources, and to be creative and energetic in our search for positive solutions, especially by engaging with and involving younger people with dementia, as well as their families and support networks. Only then, in our opinion, will the mindset begin to change for the better." And if I was to be writing those words 17 years later, I would also add, we must also be prepared to let go. And I think that is something about that facilitation, about knowing the boundaries of expert practice, but also the boundaries of when that needs to be passed on. And I think that is something which is a really interesting discourse to have as we travel forwards. And part of that discourse is being owned by people with dementia now through their human rights approaches. Peter Mittler, who is a professor at Manchester University and developed, with, alongside others, the social model of disability, has Alzheimer's disease and was instrumental in shaping this approach, which was published this year. And this being a real honour to be here to talk about nursing, I would like to go back to my own roots and honour nursing. And I don't feel that when I was trained in an asylum in 1983, it qualified me in any way, shape or form to work alongside people with dementia. I think if I was thinking about being trained these days, I think our knowledge base needs to come from a multitude of sources. I have been growing myself in my knowledge. I feel very humble that I didn't know much about social and human geography, but I do know a little bit more now. And I think that blending of knowledge bases from the psychological sciences, the health sciences, the arts, the humanities, looking at performance, reminiscence as an act, yes, but reminiscence also as a performance of life, and seeing meaning in the moment, seeing yourself as the key to communication, looking at restructuring the meaning of evidence, trying to move away a little bit from randomized control trials as the primary way of generating evidence, and into the knowledge and the relational knowledge that people living with the experience actually share and own. The importance of developing creativity, co-production and compassion, and a little nod to Jan, the value of practitioner research. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I put on that final slide a picture by Lowry. It was a repeat from the one I showed earlier. I put it there simply because I was in a care home 2 years ago. We were doing some work, and in the corner of a room was in a very large, probably the size of this room, care home room, which had a great big television on, was a lady who was trying her best to turn her seat to move. She didn't have the strength to turn this heavy seat to look out the window. She just couldn't do it. She knew the window was there. She knew she wanted to see the outside. She just couldn't get there. And when we spent a little bit of time with her, it came to pass that she actually painted with Lowry, and she was part of the Manchester art set. Yet when you went to her room to see her room, you had no idea. None whatsoever. And I think in a strange way, though we've moved and travelled a long distance, sometimes the most simple things are the most meaningful things. This is some publications of ours if you're interested at all. It's been an honour to be with you. I hope it's been of value, and thank you very much for having me here tonight. Thank you.